Hey, everybody. It's Manny Faces, host, editor, and co producer of Newsbeat, the award winning podcast that melds the worlds of high level social justice journalism and music, often incorporating original lyrical contributions from amazing independent hip hop artists to create something that we like to say it's like Democracy Now! And Black Thought had a podcast baby. But what we also do is we bring you important news when we can, bonus episodes, bonus content, most of which you can find at our Substack, newsbeat.substack.com, or as you're watching, possibly on YouTube, in video format. I'm joined, as always, by my good friends and collaborators, Mr. Rashed Mian, the managing editor of Newsbeat, Mr. Chris Tawarski, the editor-in-chief of Newsbeat. We're here today to talk about the ICJ ruling that just dropped in the courts, South Africa's case against, basically against the genocide or alleged genocide. Now confirmed. Wait, we'll find out in a minute. Rashed and Chris join us on the screen, and let's get to the bottom of this international court case against the Palestinian genocide that is occurring between the Palestinian people and Israel. What's up, fellas?
Hey, man, big day.
How was that? Did I get it right?
I would say that you're 99.9% correct.
Well, that's just as much viruses that Lysol kills. That's pretty good.
It's usually the threshold you go for in life.
Yeah, there it is. Come on screen, guys. Let's talk about it.
All right. So, Chris, you want to just get us sort of started, lay out what happened and why?
Yeah, I mean, just for a little context, I mean, we've done a couple episodes on this now, and today the International Court of Justice at The Hague, as Manny said, issued provisional orders regarding South Africa's case, charging Israel with genocide. Historic day. My question is, and I think a lot of people's question is, what does it actually mean? You know, so we'll break it down a little bit, and you know, right off the bat, I mean, try to process this, right? 2024, Israel is found. Basically, what the court issued was that Israel must stop acts of genocide.
Yeah, and basically what they said that it's plausible, right, that genocide is occurring. So as they issue this ruling on provisional measures, is what South Africa was looking for when they argued their case a few weeks ago. They're going to continue. The ICJ will continue, sort of going through the case to see if it meets the merits of a full-on genocide, and I think that could take months, if not years. So that's a ways away. And I know a lot of people who are just maybe not too familiar with the issue and maybe haven't listened to our recent podcast or watched it, may think that they were looking for an end to genocide directly. Right. This is provisional measures to stop certain elements of what's happening in this horrific, brutal campaign against the people in Gaza.
Right. If I could jump in, the headlines, many of them that hit this morning, basically focused on the international court refuses to issue command a ceasefire. So if we could just kind of, just for the lay people like myself, as is often the case, provisional measures mean what in this case? What are they kind of ordered to do, and what kind of, I guess, teeth does this order have to actually influence Israel to stop doing some of the things that look genocidal?
Right.
Right.
So let's take it one by one. So provisional measures, as Francis Boyle has been on this podcast a few weeks ago, stated is basically the ICJ saying, all right, we need to stop the harms being caused against a certain group. In this case, it's the Palestinians in Gaza, because they're the ones that now it's over 25,000 people dead. As we've said, 2/3 or more women and children. Right. There's over 7,000 people unaccounted for. So meaning buried in rubble and unfortunately likely dead. So that death toll is probably higher. So that's what provisional measures are. They're looking for basically an end to the continued violence and harm that's being caused against the Palestinians. The case which happened, the ruling which came down this morning, it was 7 a.m. Eastern time from The Hague. The judge, Joan Donoghue, who is the president of the ICJ, she's an American. You talk about teeth, Manny. She sort of was looking over at the Israelis when she said that this ruling, quote unquote, has binding effect on the Genocide Convention, which, dozens and dozens of countries are party to across the
Right.
world. And she went through, let's see, she went through 6 measures in particular,
Mm.
provisional measures that they've ordered, and the rulings were basically resounding. 5 out of the 6 were 15 votes to 2, with there's 17 judges on this panel, all
Mm.
representing a variety of countries.
Right.
And in the first one, and to the point that was made about sort of like, a full on ceasefire and an end to the hostilities. The first point is the first provisional measure says the state of Israel shall, in accordance with the obligations under the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, A, stop killing members of the group, and
Mm.
B, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. And there's other conditions that are within this. So I know people online, especially, and I think the media has really taken this and they ran with it immediately.
Right.
Offline, Manny, you mentioned that the New York Times headline was basically effectively Israel wins their defense.
Yeah, it was
In
like
a-
they, the court declines to, force Israel to stop, and
right,
so Israel could just keep going. That's not exactly what happened, though.
right,
Right.
and
I'm
I
sure
know
the
people.
article. I'm just saying the headline looks, and when people just
Sure,
read headlines, you know.
It's going to
So
be
right.
spun several different ways.
right,
Exactly. And
right,
look, we're not legal experts here. We're just reading. Look, I'm reading to you what the order says. And
right.
the
And if you're
order right
supposed to
here
stop
says
killing the
stop
killing the
killing members
people,
of the group. That's effectively not just an end to genocide, which is what they're saying, right?
right,
And we need to remember this was a case brought about genocide, which is horrific. And this is
right,
like the worst thing that people could do. And the ICJ said it's plausible because their case needs to continue. It's
right.
plausible that Israel is committing genocide against Palestinians, and they're
Right.
saying explicitly, stop killing people.
And this is like an injunction, right? Like, basically, an injunction is like, while we figure out the rest of the case, I'm gonna put this thing in place now, to make sure that things don't get out of hand or go crazy. Um, and the point I just wanted to make was that it wasn't necessarily that they can't see a ceasefire would have also implied you can't go, you can't attack your enemies, or if somebody attacks you, you can't attack them back, because the ceasefire wouldn't be binding. Hamas wouldn't have to pay attention to the ceasefire. They're not under the court's jurisdiction. So wouldn't it be hard to say, hey, Israel, you can't do any more firing at all? Like, I guess in the world of spin, they have a right to defend themselves and to fight the fighters and blah, blah, blah. But they're saying that's all you can do. And what you're doing is way, way more than that, which is what they're kind of gotten in trouble for.
One would think that the word genocide encompasses all types of violence against another party.
Sure.
So,
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I think that basically, says it right there. And look, people ran with that headline immediately, and I guess, like, I can see it. And it's not even just like I'm going to always blame corporate media, but I have seen people who are just like obviously on the side of Palestinians who are just like outright saying, like, why didn't
This
they
isn't
just stop,
enough.
call for a ceasefire? You made the point, Manny, that Hamas isn't under the jurisdiction of the court. It's just not something that they're able to do. I don't know if they can explicitly call for a ceasefire that Hamas would have to abide by, because they're not a member of the court. I think
Right.
we're losing, not us, but I think a lot of people are just like losing
Right.
the main point here, which is the International Court of Justice, which is also known as the World Court, the highest UN body in terms of legal proceedings, said Israel needs to stop committing genocide effectively by
Genocidal
calling
acts.
it plausible, right?
Right.
So I mean, I think that basically sums it up. And I know the media now is probably going to run with the other extreme, that there wasn't a ceasefire, right? Meanwhile, if all they have to do is literally read this order, and if you guys
Right.
want, I could just go through some of the other elements so people
Please.
understand.
Yep.
So that was so that first order, stop killing members of the group, was voted 15-2. The next one, again, 15-2, saying that the state of Israel shall ensure with immediate effect that its military does not commit any acts, again, described above. Number 3, and this was 16-1, Israel will, within its power, prevent and punish the direct and public incitement to commit genocide in relation to members of Palestinians. And Chris, if you want to talk about this, I think to me that's in reference to the genocidal rhetoric that was
right.
outlined by South Africa.
Donahue, for all our criticisms beforehand, in previous episodes, she read out direct quotes from Israeli officials, literally saying, we're going to cut off the food, human animals, these people are human animals, essentially, no civilian is innocent. And
Right.
she read this out this morning, right before issuing this particular order.
The things they were saying to normalize, right? To make it seem like this was okay because they're just, they're savages. We've heard that talk in every, similar campaign against other humans, in the past. So they were called out for it. It was recognized and they were called out. Oh, let me ask, who's the one? Do you know who split the votes?
I don't know. So I don't know who the one was at directly in that one. I think there was she may be
who's generally not voting for this. Like
there was a judge representing Uganda who was one that basically opposed all the measures, but I don't know if she was. So I assume she was also the one. I don't have it here in front of me, but yes, the judge representing Uganda was the one who voted against this, and I don't know if she has her own sort of legal justification that she's outlining here. But I guess we could look for that.
Yeah,
but that's the one.
That's the one.
So yeah, and
then an overwhelming votes in all of these cases. I mean, this is overwhelming. This is almost beyond dispute.
A country that I do believe, experienced genocide. I think there's over 500,000 civilians killed. I believe at the end of the 70s in Uganda, and I believe it's recognized as the Ugandan genocide. So that's interesting that they would vote against this.
Yeah. So there's what do we have here? We have about 3 more provisional measures, I think. And then 16 votes to 1 is to effectively enable urgent humanitarian assistance to enter the Gaza Strip again, which is something that really hasn't happened over the course of these 3 months. The other measure was to prevent the destruction and ensure the preservation of all the evidence. So we'll see what happens with that. And 6, like this is again, like part of what people are complaining about here. There's no quote unquote ceasefire. And then they're saying, well, in number 6, the state of Israel shall submit a report to the court on all measures taken to give effect to this order within 1 month. So the ICJ is basically saying within 1 month, we want a report from you detailing how you're stopping genocide.
Right.
Which again, I guess it's something that the court just has to do. It's a legal thing, whatever.
Right.
But just for like common sense, if we go back to the initial hearings, South Africa laid out meticulously and a very compelling case that Israel was committing genocide. And they went point by point, going through all the provisions within the Genocide Convention. And there was no fluff in the South Africa case. When it was Israel's turn to respond, they did what many people thought they were going to do, where they said Hamas, right? And Hamas is terrible. And South Africa is Hamas, is basically what they said. They said South Africa is in bed with Hamas, and they call it anti-Semitic. And that was effectively the response again today. So I don't know, like what that report that Israel is going to give the court in a month is going to say. I just expect it to be along those same lines. And let's not forget that just a few days ago, Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said nothing will stop Israel, not even the International Court of Justice. So they basically said from the outset that they're not going to comply,
even though they went there and they said we have to defend ourselves. We want to be there and we want to kind of give our defense, as if that was going to, clear them. So well, you heard us say our defense, and meanwhile, 15, 16 judges said your defense is stupid.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think I was.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, so I was, watching this unfold, and you could follow the breadcrumbs. This was about an hour. You could follow the breadcrumbs, and you saw it happen. You saw effectively what Donahue was going to rule, that they were going to rule for the provisional measures, because it just felt that way as she was talking. Oftentimes, as I mentioned, she was looking over the Israeli bench, and I just found that notable, especially because
side eyeing them,
like just looking over, like she didn't, from my vantage point, she didn't look over at South Africa. She just kept looking over at Israel. So I was like, all right, I think this is going to go the way of affirming South Africa's request.
Right.
But I just still think it's remarkable. We talked about it, and Chris just mentioned it's like 3 months ago, Israel had the entire world's sympathy after what Hamas did on October 7th. And in a short amount of time, they're in court, not only defending themselves against genocide, but now the world court is saying that it's plausible that they're committing genocide and that they must stop.
Right.
And now we're arguing over semantics. And look, I understand. I immediately went to some Al Jazeera channels to see what was happening because they do a good job of covering like Palestinians.
Yep.
And there was frustration because, like, as a Palestinian, you can imagine, like, you want a world body
Right.
to say there's a ceasefire, everybody needs to stop killing people, so these people could get back to some sort of semblance
Right.
of having an actual life, right?
Right.
So I see that point also. I'm not trying
Yeah.
to like say that we're arguing semantics here, but as we just keep repeating, you look at
It says stop
the
killing
order. It
people.
says stop killing people.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Listen, the fallout will be all over the place. The spin, like you said, Chris, will be all over the place. But
Yeah,
it's
I mean,
important to know the details.
yeah, and I just want to mention that. Look, countries have ignored these orders
Yeah, let's get back to
before.
that. Like, what's
The
gonna
United
like
States.
what'll really piss people off is that there was no ceasefire. But okay, stop killing people, but then they just keep killing people. So that's really what's going to piss people off. What happens, Chris? What can be done to, like, you can't
Well, I
arrest a
mean,
country.
first I just want to say that the United States, we had talked about the Nicaragua case in the past. We just completely ignored the ruling of that. The U.S. when it was found guilty of a slew of irregularities and violations of human rights. Um, Most recently, which garnered some headlines, obviously, Russia was ordered by the same court to stop the violence against the civilian population in Ukraine. That
Oh,
has
that
now stopped.
happened. Oh no, it didn't happen. Oh no, it didn't happen.
Um,
I could see why people are worried that these
Mhm.
you
orders
know,
aren't going to really. Yeah.
now, as Francis Boyle told us in a previous episode, it's really up to South Africa now. I mean, well, it's up to, I mean, every country involved to do their part, but South Africa can take this, I believe, to the Security Council. Now, again, the United States could veto anything to do with this. It could then, I believe, take it to the General Assembly.
Mhm.
Mm,
Um, and I believe Boyle himself had stated that he had tried to set up some type of criminal tribunal to enforce some of the stuff that sort of didn't go anywhere, but could potentially be resurrected.
interesting.
So
So there are consequences that could come. And again, as you said, as you both said earlier, that this isn't even the final verdict, if you want to use,
this isn't even the
court
final. And I
term.
just want to know
Right.
too, and Rashad, if you want to comment about this too, but you know, just getting these orders also uh, implies the guilt of the United States in
Mm,
complicity. Any country, any nation that's a party to the Genocide Convention has an obligation under that treaty to do everything in its power to prevent genocide and to hold those accountable who
right.
are committing it. Biden, as we know, had set illegally, bypassed Congress. Uh, Billions in aid in military funding. It's U.S. bombs, it's U.S. ammo that's slaughtering some of these people. So, you would imagine that, and I know we discussed it in a previous episode too. You know, uh, the United States has kiboshed any attempt so far at a ceasefire. They called South Africa's claims meritless
Mhm.
publicly right at the outset. If Biden wanted some cover to actually stop, I mean, he has it now. He doesn't
Right.
need it.
Right.
But I mean, this is, as Rashad pointed out, this is the global court
Right.
telling Israel to stop its genocidal acts.
Yeah.
We are supplying a lot of the weaponry used to commit those acts. So that should stop too.
And effectively giving it the full support of the White House and the administration. I mean, they could the Biden administration could say that they're opening channels, they're having conversations. These State Department horrifically, these State Department hearings have become must-watch TV just to see how
Right.
spokespeople are going to tie themselves into knots, talking
Mm,
about every horrific thing that happens every day in Gaza, and they just every response is, "Oh, we have communications. They're private. We're not going to tell you what we're saying to Israel, what Israel is saying back to us." I'm just
mm.
not buying that at this point. I just think that my perspective, I don't want to say that they're just okay with it, but I don't know what other conclusion there is. Um, So, Chris, you mentioned Boyle. He has released sort of a statement. He emailed somebody else, this is Sam Husseini on Twitter.
Mm.
And since we had him on the podcast, I feel like it's probably good to get an update from Boyle, even though it's not directly to us. On the ICJ's orders, he said, quote, "This is a massive, overwhelming legal victory for the Republic of South Africa against Israel on behalf of the Palestinians. The UN General Assembly now can suspend Israel from participation in its activities as it did for South Africa and Yugoslavia. It can admit Palestine as a full member, and especially since the International Criminal Court has been a farce," which is something he argued on our episode, "it can establish a tribunal to prosecute the highest level officials of the Israeli government, both civilian and military." So that's that from Boyle, who is an international rights expert and who has argued before the ICJ before.
Right.
So you don't have to take our word for it. Chris mentioned
Right.
some of this, and this is backed up by what Boyle had to say. Just one other thing in terms of enforcement that we just talked about. People aren't going to like this, but the reason why, and I think we talked about this, the Houthis are doing what they're doing. Effectively, the government of Yemen, they've said this. We are the country abiding by the Genocide Convention. When we see a genocide occurring, it's our duty under the convention to put a halt to it.
Right.
So what they're doing in the Red Sea is that act of defiance to try to stop a genocide. We, the United States, has turned it into a war on Yemen, even though the Pentagon won't call it a war on Yemen. That's what it is.
Right.
And they're also bombing other countries. So that's the weird situation that the United States is in. And it's always been sort of my thinking that the United States is never going to back off from what Chris said, that quote from, I think, Kirby, the case against Israel is meritless, is because, as we said, they're complicit. So if they're complicit, can they just back away and say, all right, let's put an end to this? Or do they have to dig in even deeper to try to protect themselves?
Yeah, it's interesting. And again, just the wording of it changes everything. Like I'm looking at the New York Times right now, as of the time we're recording this, and their live update section says Israel-Hamas war. UN court orders Israel to prevent genocide, but does not demand a stop to war.
Yeah.
It's as if to say, we're telling you, hey, whatever you guys do, don't do genocide, okay? It's not accurately depicting that the court has found that Israel is already committing acts that are genocidal, and they're telling them to stop.
It's outrageous.
The way it's phrased in the media right now is as if the court says, whatever you guys do, just don't do the genocide thing. So to your point, the United States could just say, yeah, we agree. Please don't do the genocide thing, but not actually come far enough to say, oh, you are doing the genocide thing. Like it's the way that it's like the narrative could be twisted, and it's right there in the record of, the New York Times, the paper of record, the terminology right there.
Yeah. Like I said, it's outrageous. It's outrageous to me that
the headline should just be Israel is committing genocidal acts, says court.
Exactly. I mean, this is exactly.
I don't get it.
Another country was just
facilitating, and the United States is facilitating.
Another country was just plausibly. That's the wording that was used by South Africa, because that was the legal threshold they needed to meet,
right,
to move this forward.
Right.
Donahue, the president of the ICJ, one of the judges, mentioned more than a dozen times the word plausible. It's plausible that Israel is committing genocide, and that's the headline you go with.
Right.
And then it's not even just like, I know people, like, they probably think we're crazy because we're always criticizing the media. When an organization like the New York Times, and I'm sure other people, I'm sure others have already done it, that basically sets the agenda. Right. So that is what that's a baseline journalist is going to go with when they're questioning, and that's when they're questioning officials, and that's what the Kirbys and the Matthew Millers,
they're going to fall back on
and
that
all
wording.
That's what they're going to say. Yeah. It's outrageous to me that when another country, the supposed only democracy in the Middle East, is what they say, right, is being accused of genocide from the International Court of Justice, and that's what you go with, and you don't even read the order.
Right.
I'm looking at
I was looking at CNN. Top UN court orders Israel to prevent genocide in Gaza.
Thank you.
which again just says, I'm telling you not to do the thing that you're doing, but it's not saying that they're doing it. It's saying that don't do that thing.
And that's
Right.
something they're already
It's weird
obligated to
phrasing.
do. That's something that they're
Right.
already obligated to do. There's
Right. Like
nothing
you don't need
changed with that.
you don't need a court order to say don't do genocide. You're part of an agreement that says we're not going to genocide. You don't need a court order to enforce that. It's like, well, you do. I mean, it's like child support. You're supposed to just give money, and the court is supposed to enforce it if you don't. Fine. So maybe you need a court order, but not to prevent it. You need a court order to stop doing it. And that's what they've basically gotten. And the wording of the media is strange. So I'm glad we're pointing this out to people who might think like this means nothing. But again, if those further consequences don't happen, then it does mean nothing. And then it just adds to the, ridiculous, well, not so ridiculous. It adds to the mistrust people have in institutions, in law, in anything, because once you see that the international, like you said, the biggest body of judicial power in the world can't actually do anything. And then you wonder why, people like Trump flaunt, the law, flaunt the judges and act, because there's no consequences. So I can understand why people saying a ceasefire would have been something they had to do, and it would have been obvious that they're not doing it. And you can't fire a bomb, you can't fire a missile. So a ceasefire would have been a much more, clear, definitive stop to this. And that's something that could have been, if you violate that, it's obvious, and then we could do something about it. But this makes it murkier. And I think that's probably why a lot of people are, annoyed or not, not happy with the result. Does that make sense? Am I making sense?
Yeah. First of all, I like to say I'm impressed how you can make international law relatable by talking about child support.
That's right. We know about child support.
One of your many
We know
talents.
about, am I right, guys? Dude, right? Huh? Don't we all know? Wait, no, you don't all have the same. Oh, never mind. Go ahead. Continue.
No, I just agree with everything you're saying. And look, like this isn't just us. So here is, look, I think this guy is he's the director of the Electronic Intifada, which is a pro-Palestine news organization that's often called anti-Semitic and all the horrible things because they talk about the Palestinian rights, right? And he said Israel, here you go. A ceasefire, quote, is what you demand in an armed conflict. In a genocide, you demand an immediate end to all genocidal acts, and that is exactly what the ICJ ordered with immediate effect. Please stop helping Israel spin its historic defeat as a win. We had almost near majorities of a 17-panel judge say plausible genocide, stop doing this, stop killing people. And again, that should be the headline.
Right. Well, it's our headline. And so there you go.
We got to make sure it's the headline.
We got to make sure it's the headline. So now that being said, gentlemen, let's wrap it up. I want people to go dig in further if they want to dig further. Go back and listen to our interview with Boyle, who really, breaks down some of how we got here. And that's important too, if you're just catching this and want to get some more. But I guess, what are the next steps? What are we looking for? And what would prompt us to come back and talk about this some more? What's the next thing that we're watching for?
Yeah, I guess, like as Chris, as you mentioned, right? If South Africa brings this to the UN, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's you would think that would be the next obvious step.
Okay.
And obviously, I haven't seen anything yet, but we want to hear what the U.S. is going to say officially about this.
I'm sure they'll be asked at today's presser.
It's a Friday, so they're probably going to push those pressers to 4:45 p.m.
Right, makes sense.
To make sure nobody cares about it. I guess I will end with the response from Israel. We should probably
just interesting.
Put it out there. Yep. So this is from Benjamin Netanyahu. The very claim that Israel is carrying out genocide against Palestinians is not only false, it's outrageous, and the willingness of the court to deliberate it at all is a mark of disgrace that will not be erased for generations. So they said that even the fact that they had these proceedings is a farce.
It's from the Donald Trump PR campaign for courts and justice. It's like this, it's a witch hunt.
And last thing I'll say, just like I would encourage everybody, I still would encourage everybody to go watch or read the South African presentation, just because I feel like it's a moment in history that we're going to come back to.
Yeah.
And recall a lot of times. Definitely just like this ruling was only an hour long. I think it's just worth it to also just to feel like what's at stake. Like you really feel it as you're digesting this stuff and not just hearing it from us.
Yeah. Yeah, and I gotta tell you, even the people who are not, fully aligned with one side or the other, it gives you more context to the overall situation. And if you want to have opinions that are educated and informed, if you want to have a position on this, you gotta know every little tidbit of it. So even if you're not, if you're yelling at us and like, you guys don't understand and whatever, we're on the wrong side of it, fine. Go check it out, then come back and, and let us know how you feel. But I think anyone who wants to be further informed about this, what sometimes is unrelatable, happening all the way across the other, we have a million things that are trying to get our attention. And all we hear is, all we see is sound bites or memes on an Instagram feed. You want to get the real deal, the nitty gritty. It's there in black and white. So don't let the closure of every single journalism outlet in the world stop you from going and, and reading and finding out a little bit more about this directly from the source. I agree with you. Chris, any last thoughts?
I mean, just, whether a court deems it genocide or not, you still have tens of thousands of dead civilians, half of them children. I mean, that should stop no matter what, right? That's an atrocity no matter what. So whether the highest court in the land deems it, gives it a different classification, yes, that's incredibly important legally,
right.
And hopefully that will help end it, make it stop. But when you have massacres and slaughters and carnage like this, calling it one thing or another, it just has to stop. Period.
Yeah, indeed. All right, gentlemen. Thank you for doing this. As always, I always thank you. Like I said, I always learn from you. I hope our listeners and viewers have learned something. Please follow us on social media, US Newsbeat. Please follow our free Substack for all of our episodes, plus bonus content, including some content we just recently published about this issue. You can find us at newsbeat.substack.com. It is a free newsletter subscription on Substack, newsbeat.substack.com. If you're listening on the podcast feed, find us on YouTube and check out the Substack. And if you're watching, you do know that we also have an audio feed for the podcast. So if you want to make sure or you prefer the audio version of all this jibber jabber, then just go over to your favorite podcast app and put in Newsbeat. 2 words, one love, Newsbeat, by us to you. With love. So once again, Chris Tawarski, our editor-in-chief, for Shed Me Out, our managing editor, myself, the host and editor, and all of us co-producing Newsbeat. Thank you for listening and watching, and we'll be back soon. I'm Manny Faces. Peace and love to you and yours.